You are listening to the Enormocast.
La Sportiva presents Storytime. There once was a little boy named Tommy Caldwell. One day, little Tommy decided he wanted to climb a really big wall, but he couldn't find any shoes to climb the big wall in. So he decided to build his own out of Scotch tape, fluffernutter, and a used pair of hand jammies left behind by a couple of Euros in Camp 4. When those didn't work, Tommy called the adults at Sportiva and asked them for help. Sportiva came up with the TC Pro, named after little Tommy himself. A shoe so good at big wall climbing that little TC grew up to climb the hardest, biggest big walls in the world in his TC Pros. Then he talked his best friend, teeny tiny Alex H, into trying them, and Alex, well, he became a pretty good climber too. So if you want to be like TC or Tiny A, go to Sportiva.com or your favorite mountain shop and check out a pair of TC Pros, and maybe someday you'll grow up too. The end.
Does your partner suffer from try-it-again syndrome? Or one-hangitis? Or even worse, delusional performance disorder? Well, there really isn't a cure for DPD, except for a good smackdown. But it does probably mean that you've been belaying them for hours and hours on end, and are now suffering from BNP, or belaying neck pain, a stiffness in the cervical spine just below the occipital region of your thick skull. But now there's a cure for BNP resulting from DPD. Ask your doctor about belay specs, and when he doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, just smile and tuck that prescription for opiates away for your next overseas plane flight. But then ask several strangers about belay specs. Ask that cute barista at the coffee shop on the corner about belay specs. In fact, ask everyone you know about belay specs. Keep talking about belay specs until nobody wants to climb with you anyway. Problem solved. But if that doesn't work, then go to belayspecs.com and get yourself a pair. And don't forget to enter Enormocast at checkout for a discount and to help out the podcast. Side effects may include people thinking you're staring at them when you're not, old trad climbers rolling their eyes, people putting them on for the first time and saying, ooh, that's trippy, people insisting they don't like those weird glasses even though they've never even tried them. If you feel drowsy, nauseous, or rumbling in your stomach, horny, confused, or have strange, vivid dreams, this probably has nothing to do with belay specs, and is more likely from that bug you picked up in that backpacker's hostel in Rio after 5 too many caipirinhas. Belayspecs.com. Say adios to belayer neck pain.
We gotta get
Listen, where are you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Normo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
big
big
house. We
place
sold it
outside
out.
of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold it out.
20,000 seats.
We
really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Good weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enorma at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is August 9th, about 9 o'clock here in Central Time. Yes, I'm located at a remote bunker here in northern Wisconsin right now. And this is episode 134 of the Enormocast, a conversation with alpinist and filmmaker Graham Zimmerman. And my apologies to Graham. This thing got put on the back burner for quite some time. I got it actually way back in April when he was in town for the 5 Point Film Festival, premiering a film at the festival, and just got put on the back burner for a bunch of different reasons. And here we go. Anyway, it's not a lot we do on here with these wide open interviews becomes that timely, but nevertheless, finally getting to it. Excited about this one. We go down two different paths, not just his climbing, but also his filmmaking, which is, I think, pretty cool. And yeah, but he's in the Karakoram right now. Anyway, so he's not going to hear this apology till he gets back. So for all he knows, it's been out for months. But before we get to that, I want to draw your attention to the newest sponsor here at the Enormocast, Boulder Denim. These guys are out of Canada, 2 young climbers that got in touch with me, and I really dig what they're doing. They just decided to get involved with apparel and sort of go up against the big guys, if you will. They've just got a few different designs on women's and men's jeans, stretchy, stain resistant, made for climbing, made for activity. They just really felt like nothing like that existed, at least not the way they wanted it, so they built it. Now they're touring around the country in their Airstream. I think they're still on the road here in the States, showing the jeans off at gyms and trying to get excitement around this stuff. And anyway, I just decided to get on board. I like having the big guns, the Black Diamond and Sportiva, but obviously I also want to support some of these younger, smaller companies run by climbers. These guys are both climbers. And anyway, check them out. It's at boulderdenim.com. You can enter eNormo at checkout to get a discount. Obviously, get the NormaCast a little bit of kickback from those guys. But I really want them to succeed. And like I said, it's nice to have this smaller action here on the NormaCast as well. Bonfire, Belay Specs, Peter Gilroy, and now these guys. And the nice thing personally is that this is going to hold off my downward spiral into dad jeans. That's the eventual place I'm going to end up. But in the meantime, I'm sure if the Normal Baby was aware of such things, he'd be totally okay with me wearing these jeans and not be embarrassed at all, like he's going to be about so many other things as he grows older. So again, that's boulderdenim.com. Enter eNormo at checkout. Help these 2 climbers keep the dream alive. And thanks for keeping my dream alive. Things are going strong over here at the NormaCast, smooth as silk. So let's just get to it. An interview with Graham Zimmerman. So on each episode, I try to say something ridiculous to keep you listening to and considering the commercials on the NormaCast. For example, I might tell you that Joe Kinder once trekked 40 miles across the Arctic sea ice in a cold forged-down hoodie, saving the lives of 2 wounded seal pups he had stuffed in the roomy legs of his vintage Jinko jeans. Or despite marketing's advice about being inclusive, I'll say something completely esoteric like Black Diamond's headlamps are brighter than 6 cluster winks on a cookie cutter. That's one for you marine biologists. But of course, these are flat-out fabrications, fake news if you will. But what's not a lie is that Black Diamond simply makes and sells great gear to keep you safe, warm, and dry, and feeling as slick as Bootsy Collins' middle finger on your next adventure. You need good gear, and the climbers at Black Diamond make good gear, and they have supported the NormaCast since nearly its inception. So please consider that next time you're about to throw down hard cash for that next prized piece of gear. Black Diamond is a proud supporter of the NormaCast.
But it was cool to get Kitty. I interviewed Kitty while I was.
Oh, cool! Right on. So, that's sweet.
And I'd only met her in passing, and she's a little. She can be a little like what's the word? A little bit inscrutable, and like as just if you just meet her, casually. And then I spent the whole weekend kind of with her because she was over at my hotel, so cool. We kept getting rides together and stuff. And yeah, she's really, really sweet and wonderful.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't know Kitty well at all.
Yeah, but she's got a little bit of that tough outer crust to get through.
Dude, totally.
Yeah, but she's really just a total sweetheart. So
and she is a badass as well. So
you are here at 5 Point because you have a film in the program today, or was it last night? I forget what you told me.
The film Above the Fray is in the program tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the story with your movie?
It's a film about Beth Rodden, and it's a film about her experience in Kyrgyzstan.
Okay.
And then her experiences rock climbing, and then getting injured, and then having her son Theo, and it's really about. It's about transformation, it's about motherhood, and it's about engaging vulnerability.
I've been trying to get Beth on the show. We've talked about it a number of times, and we've just not been able to cross paths because she's a busy woman because of all these things. Particularly, I mean, having a kid. Now that I've got a kid.
I think with Beth, you got to go chase her around these days. But she's awesome. She's incredibly kind, very thoughtful, and clearly super talented gal.
I've been trying to get it at OR, and it's like she's at Outdoor Retailer, and she tends to just dip. Like, I mean, we start to plan it, and she's like, I get there at 9 a.m. and then, I'm leaving like 6 hours later or whatever, and we've never been able to get done. But hopefully, Beth, if you're listening, let's keep trying to get you on the show. So let me ask you then, before we get into alpinism, since we're at the film festival, that's where we're getting this done here in Carbondale, about filmmaking, because, your climbing is obviously your motivation, your personal part of it, but then you've got this public person who's putting out media. There's a lot of humor in it, and I kind of just wanted to ask you about, as you come up as a climber, you said you were a dirtbag for a long time here. I don't know, and we'll get into some of your other history. But when did the filmmaking, or when did that become part of like just life for you as a climber? Was it organic? Was it just you guys fooling around with cameras and then starting to make stuff? Or was it sort of a plan that you came up with at some point?
It certainly wasn't much of a plan, but let's see. I guess, film has been something that's always interested me. And with climbing, I've always been interested to find ways to share it with the tribe, with others. I think that alpinism is something that I really love deeply. And it's also something that I think could be a pretty selfish pursuit. If you go on these trips and you do these things and you don't tell anybody, they're really just for you. And that's great if that's what you want. But it's pretty important for me, if I'm going to put all this energy towards something and utilize all these resources for something, to have an ability to share inspiration with the community. And that's kind of what got me into, content creation at large. And as I started getting more into writing and taking photos and shooting video and started doing more work as an athlete, it just all of those things matured, and now we're at the point where filmmaking is one of the primary things that I do. And I really enjoy it. And as professionally, for me personally, I'm much more of a scientist. I studied science. I worked as a geophysicist for a long time, but creativity and kind of that, I guess it would be right brain engagement is something that I didn't really get into until my early 20s, and it's kind of developed with my sense of looking at how to get at mountains differently. And there's a lot of creativity involved there. There's also a lot of just straight, crunching numbers, logistics. But if you want to really think hard about what you want to do in the mountains and what, is most meaningful to you, I think there's a lot of creative space there. And I think that engaging that and creating, films or writing, that kind of thing, has all developed together, and it's been something it's been a process I've really, really enjoyed.
Let me ask you a quick thing about logistics. This festival we're at, it really focuses on the filmmakers as much as just showing movies to the audience. It's always been something that, the 5 Point, they've always tried to encourage filmmakers to come here and learn, and often have even financed films and things like that. So let me ask you a little bit about the logistics. So when you're up there shooting footage, on these climbs, what are you using? I mean, are we down to like iPhone, or are we what are you guys pulling out on this stuff? Because that's really like in my lifetime, as a climber for 20-some years or whatever, and not just in climbing, but in the world of media. Even sitting and recording this, 20 years ago, we'd have needed a truck outside with cables like running to it, honestly. And here we have this like handheld thing. So, but within climbing, that's just changed so much that you guys are running light, and you can just pull these things out and have them and be climbing hard with
like a little bit of gear to make a film?
I mean, it's pretty incredible, and it's something that's certainly progressed a lot over my climbing career. I think.
Even in like a decade or even 5 years, things are just shrinking.
So I think on the first kind of climbing film that I made was on a route in Alaska that was called Vitology. My dear pal Mark Allen and I, and we had those flip cameras. Do you remember those? It was like a big iPhone, and all it did was shoot shitty video.
Yeah.
And we just dragged those up the climb and just kept them on as much as possible. And it was sweet, and we put out a video that had a whole bunch of really expensive music that we didn't license because we didn't know anything about that, and all this flip footage, and it was great. That was actually kind of my first real dive into that world.
Yeah, the flip. Wasn't it just the flip or something like that?
I think that's what it was called.
What did it record on? Was it digital, like tapes, or was it?
No, yeah, it was digital, and it was all internal memory,
right.
And I think it shot at like 640. Just tiny.
Those guys they were this giant innovation, but they just got like swept away anyway.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean? Because it was like the coolest thing in the world for like 2 years.
Yeah,
and they were like, we're on top of the world, and then all of a sudden it was just like, no, you're not. Your thing's a piece of junk. Like
all the phones were like, actually, we're just going to put that on our phone.
Yeah. So.
Thank you. But these days, we have all these small
cameras
that we can carry. I mean, we could dive into the specifics of what I'm dragging around up there, but it's like small mirrorless systems.
I'm just curious, yeah.
And, it's there are things that we have these cameras that are really small and work really well.
Yeah, I'm just curious because I started climbing in the world of slide film, right? And I just remember at times being really excited to document and to have my camera with me, but then also you had this like little brick 30 Nikon FE2 or whatever, and it was serious weight, and it was also a pain in the ass to pull out, and mine didn't even have autofocus. I think autofocus was something that was super expensive at that point. And so it became like this burden, and I always wonder when I see these films, obviously if you're up there creating and you want to be, you have this idea of getting enough footage that at some point later you can tell your story. If it's ever like a pain in the ass or a burden or something you force yourself to do at the wrong moments. We reviewed, or we put out Cold yesterday again in our best of thing, and famous film that Corey Richards did, and that's one where I'm just like, how much did it suck to I keep trying to remember to pull the camera out when like all you're really trying to do is survive during that. So is it ever feel like intrusive, or is it just something that you're like, this is part of climbing now for me, is to get this thing out?
It's certainly part of climbing. It's really easy when the climbing is really good and it's really pretty.
Yeah.
The hard thing is
sunny out, it's warm.
Yeah, and you're like,
take your glove off.
My partner is traversing across this gorgeous swath of rock, and I'm just standing here at the belay, and I'm going to lean back with my camera. And I think that that film Cold excels for a lot of reasons. It's an incredible film, but and when Corey pulls out the camera immediately after the avalanche on their way off of the peak, that's really, as a filmmaker, I see that as really impressive, because that's this moment where everything is fucked. Can I say bad words?
Oh yeah.
Okay, great. Where everything is fucked, and his immediate reaction is to capture the experience, which is really hard, and that's something that I certainly find challenging. It's when things get bad, when the storm rolls in, when whatever. To be like, okay, I'm going to have the camera out, and then we're going to deal.
Right.
And I think there are some things you can do to make that easier. One of them is to climb as a team of three. If you have 3 people, you have 3 heads in the game, 3 people to deal with problems, and it means that it's a lot easier to capture.
Right.
If you're climbing by yourself, it's a lot harder.
Right.
Yeah. There's kind of, so it's
shaky helmet footage looking at your shoes.
Yeah. Oh, don't we all love it?
Have you ever been on some sort of mission where you're really excited to get all this footage and your partners aren't so excited to have it out, or is it something that you make sure is up front?
That hasn't really been a problem. I think at this point it's something that people know that I'm fired up about. And I mean, climbing partnerships in the big mountains are such an intimate thing.
Sure.
That, I think that the people who I get along with best in the mountains are people who are also interested in capturing that experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the guys I see, you've made some films with and hang out with is Austin Sidek. And that guy, yeah, that's one of his sort of modus operandi as well. And you guys have tried to bring, some of your stuff is pretty humorous. Is there a philosophy behind that other than just you guys, drinking beers and coming up with goofy ideas, or is putting humor in this whole serious game something that you aspire to do, or does it just kind of again happen sort of naturally? Because there's this mold that I grew up with, and that alpinism was a serious business, and if the book came out, it was suffering, and it was, self-transformation through burning your soul to a crisp and then seeing what grew out of it. Kind of was the sort of twite mode, if you will.
Totally.
And I don't know, it seems like there's a generation, and I talked to Tommy Caldwell, and he mentioned that even within sport climbing and within competition climbing, that his generation were, looked at these guys that appeared to hate climbing and said, well, seems kind of not that much fun, you guys, let's start having fun with this.
It's really interesting. I read a lot of Mark Twain when I was younger, and I still dip my toe in occasionally.
Yeah.
I love that writing.
He defined the era for sure.
And and I think he really brought an attitude towards specifically alpinism that was aggressive, and it also pushed really hard on these clean tactics. Mm-hmm. Not utilizing siege style tactics, going ultralight, and really part of that is being really aggressive, and part of that is being really kind to our mountain environment, and I think that it also oftentimes allows for these experiences that you get to have with your partners, where you get way out there, mm-hmm. And you don't have a whole bunch of rope trailing all the way back to base camp,
right.
When it's just two of you tied to the side of a big mountain.
He kind of introduced these tactics in a sense that have become the style. This is how climbing is now, at least at that end where it matters in terms of us climbers.
Totally, yeah. which is incredible. Yeah. And I think that he and that community that he was a part of really kind of allowed for the next generation, my generation, to not have to be as worried about being quite as tough. And allowed us to kind of engage other emotions within climbing, because when it comes down to it, we suffer. Things are scary and hard, but there's a lot of really funny stuff that happens as well.
Sure.
Whether that's
absurd. There's an absurdity to the whole tactic, the whole operation, that can't be denied.
Totally.
And so, so humor, absurdity, it's there.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you can't step outside and look at how ridiculous what you're trying to do really is, it's kind of,
Totally. And I guarantee you that Mark and all his partners giggled a lot in their tent together.
Oh yeah.
But that's just not, because of what their community valued, because of what they needed to share about climbing. That's not what got shared. And I think that, to be totally honest, that some of these projects I've been working on with Austin, with Jim Aikman, and a few other folks, it's really been about sharing some of those elements of climbing culture, of our climbing experience that are not quite as hardcore,
right?
That are just, that are fun,
right?
And that's something that I really get a kick out of.
Yeah,
because we don't need to take it so damn seriously.
Well, it's funny because I personally, even with this show, like I waffle. Some days I am that. I'm just like, this is absurd, and it's so ridiculous what we do. And you get into the whole. Compared to actual human beings who are actually suffering, the whole first world problem thing or whatever. But then at times I'm just like, no, this is serious. It's my life, and don't make fun of it because, it is this thing that has shaped me. There is this dichotomy with climbing where you can fall into both camps pretty easily.
And it is both.
It is both, right?
Yeah, it totally is an absurdity, and it is the most incredible thing that I can imagine doing.
Right. I think, the complexity of it, obviously, the greater community mainstream thinks, falls to this adrenaline rush thing, which as climbers and in any sport, whether any of these adventure sports, the people doing it are like, no. If that's all it was, it'd be a roller coaster, and you do it a few times and then call it good. Mm-hmm. There's a complexity to it, and I think that dichotomy is certainly a part of that complexity.
Oh yeah.
That keeps us coming back. Where literally on a climb you can be suffering, again with quotes around it. And then an hour later, you're laughing. And then an hour later, you're like, I'm going to die soon. And then you're on top, and you're like, oh, that was fun. This up and down, this emotion. So, filmmaking and storytelling, I think, is really great when it's somehow, and it's very difficult to capture both of those things. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a lot easier to do one and not mix the other one. And I think the humor thing is really tricky. Because I've thought about it too. People have said that this podcast can be really funny at times, mostly when either Kelly Cordes or Hayden Kennedy's on. Mm-hmm. But I've thought about what if I was going to make a funny movie about climbing, what would I do? And I have this, these images in my head, but then, comedy is no joke. And what you think you're get it? What you and your bros think is funny around the fire, drink a whiskey or whatever, super hard to and maybe it's not funny at all because you were stoned or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so, have you guys sort of met that in creating these sort of humorous films?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not a. Comedy is super hard.
Yeah.
And I lay no claim to being good at it at all.
Right.
I think that
you can't.
Yeah. It's really tricky, and it's.
Spraying about how funny you are. That's that's the worst kind of spray.
That would be really really bad. No, seriously though, I think that there's a lot of kind of referencing other people. Mm-hmm. Do you think this is funny? Because I think this is funny, and then just figuring out how to capture it properly. Talk about the challenge of comedic timing and stuff like that. I'm going to
tell you, and I'm friends with Austin, mm-hmm. but I got to give you the edge on your acting, just a little bit over Austin. So if you're listening to Austin, you need, I don't know, just tune in to what Graham's doing, because just letting you know.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, people want to check that out. You can find that stuff on Graham's website. So let's move on.
It's all on the internet.
Yeah, it is. I know your whole existence out there to be judged.
Yeah.
That's not funny at all, you asshole.
You were right. You're not funny.
Cool. Let's talk about your climbing. We've spent a whole bunch on that, but. The reason I started with that, A, we're at the film festival, B, it just seems like for you they have become something that's the filming or the trying to tell the story is second nature to you. So, but let's talk about your climbing. One of the things I found interesting is that you sort of cut your teeth alpine climbing. It sounds like in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing, how you ended up in New Zealand, how long you spent there, and what that community was like? Because it's famous, for a hardcore alpinist community over there?
Yeah, well, we may as well go a ways back.
Yeah.
So my folks are from Wichita and Salina, Kansas.
Oh, nice. Very, very deep climbing.
Yeah, there's some really great climbing out there. And
the Wichita people will argue that they're...
Yeah, there are actually some boulders in central Kansas that are pretty cool. But they, in the mid 80s got pregnant and decided that they wanted to move as far from Kansas as they could. They kind of had dreams of going elsewhere, and I think they kind of saw that they had this choice to either stay in Kansas and raise kids in Kansas or to get out of Dodge. And so they moved to Wellington, New Zealand.
So they drilled a hole directly through the earth. I mean, popped out the other side, basically.
Totally. And, it's really interesting. I mean, it was like the mid 80s, well before all the technology that we have these days. Now when you go down to New Zealand, it's super easy to call home. But, the long distance calls weren't that reliable. There was no internet. And it was a pretty bold move,
Oh,
they were, I think they were 5 months pregnant when they moved down there and just showed up on the other side of the world, decided to figure out work and lived down there for, I think they lived down there for 4 years. So I was like 3.5 when they moved back to the States and they moved to Seattle. And so that's really where my background in New Zealand comes from. And it's also, I think...
So you were born there?
I was born there, yeah. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Key point. I was born in Wellington. Okay. And so I have a citizenship down there. Okay. Since my folks are Yankees, I have a U.S. citizenship as well. And it's, I think not only has that been super foundational for me in terms of being able to go back to New Zealand where I was able to really cut my teeth in alpinism after high school, but that decision for my folks has always been something that, I don't know if I've ever done anything that bold. Right. I've done some stuff where it's, maybe a little bit audacious, but that's pretty badass on their part.
And New Zealand is on our purview. They have a really huge tourism industry now. But it wasn't. I mean, it was sheep herders, and it was pretty off the beaten path in the 80s.
Oh, for sure.
We started before this. I was telling you that I went to school there for a semester in the early 90s, 91, I believe it was. And even then, they were just like, oh, we have this resource here, this beautiful tourism resource. But while I was there, it was being felt out. How are we going to deal with this? And you still felt like nobody had seen somebody from elsewhere for a long time, especially on the South Island.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I'm correct in saying that the wool industry was still the largest industry in New Zealand until the Lord of the Rings movies came out.
Probably.
And that was what launched the tourism.
It was definitely
scene.
In 1980. It was
pretty quiet. Oh yeah. I mean, I think it was 60 sheep for every person kind of thing.
So moving back to Seattle, and
we moved back to Seattle, and that's where I grew up. Right. I lived in Seattle till I was 18. And that's where I was exposed to mountains by way of skiing, by way of rock climbing, kind of my folks being from Kansas didn't really know what to do about the fact that I was getting into climbing, and they signed me up for a course with the American Alpine Institute. And I think, it's super cool. And I think that their intention was that I would get it out of my system and not do it anymore. Mm-hmm. And clearly that was not what came to pass. Right. And the guy who taught that was actually this fellow named Mark Allen, who I ended up doing some of my first big ascents in Alaska with, which is pretty sweet. And then when I was 18, I moved back to New Zealand for school and studied glaciology down there. Okay. And while getting that degree, I attended in Dunedin at Otago University. So 3 hours south of where you were. Right.
Yeah, I was in Christchurch, or outside of Christchurch.
Totally. And so being there, having the Southern Alps right at my back door, it was kind of at that point in my life that I knew that climbing was something that I really wanted to pursue, and those mountains were where I wanted to learn. Right. And they're big mountains. I mean, they come straight out of the ocean. They have giant glaciers. They're hard to get at. The weather's terrible. The conditions are fickle. I mean, they were a great place to learn how to deal with bad conditions, to learn how to get at things that are challenging to approach, and I think it created a really strong foundation for me as a climber.
I was going to ask you that, if you felt like, it's New Zealand, the climbing and the mountaineering, it's been famous, since Hillary, right? That even though it's not such high altitude, it still is this incredible training ground that's pumped, alpinists into the world for decades, for the history of alpinism, really. And, Hillary was a Kiwi, and
Hillary had the FA of Everest. In case anybody doesn't know.
Oh, this is a climbing podcast.
Okay, good.
Come on,
look it up on the internet.
Yeah, look it up on the internet. But it definitely is a place that forces you to have your skills. And even though what's Cook's like 13,
something like that,
but it's all of the 13.
Oh yeah,
it's like the whole 13.
From
the ground up.
Well, it's funny going from the Cascades, where the tallest mountains are volcanoes. The tallest mountains are some of the easiest things to climb.
Sure.
The Cook is it's a real deal mountain.
Oh, for sure.
It's super. There's no easy way to the top.
Right.
It's hard to get to the base. It's hard to get to the top. It's got a bunch of really radical climbing on it.
True glaciers.
Oh yeah.
And true conditions. And then the weather is the famous thing, because it's Patagonian in that same sense of storms like steaming across the ocean and then hitting this massive out of nowhere.
The same storms ripping around Antarctica.
Yeah.
I think they hit a tighter constriction at the southern tip of South America, but still.
So how long? So you stayed there for school? How long were you down there?
I was down there for 4 years. Spent a lot of time in the Southern Alps. Spent a lot of time drinking beer in college.
Right.
A
little town down there.
Yeah.
In Eden, like in the middle of nowhere a little bit.
Yeah, it's super cool. It's right on the ocean. It's got some pretty good rock climbing. It's got really good surfing, and the university culture there was wonderful.
Right.
Realistically though, my primary focus while I was down there was climbing. Well, and school, but
right. And so after school, came back to the States.
Yeah, so after school, graduated, came back to the States, and really just really dove into being on the road, climbing a lot, and just figuring out how to finance expeditions and going on as many trips as I could. And of course, went on the first few trips where we just got pummeled, but just slowly started to figure things out, and kind of apply some of those skills learned in New Zealand, learn new things, and started to figure out how to get up these mountains that I found inspiring in Asia and in the Alaska Range and in South America.
So let me ask you that. For you, when you said you found a certain mountain inspiring, are you able to sort of quantify, or not necessarily quantify, but maybe talk a little bit about what an expedition, what is the kind of expedition that really drives you in terms of the characteristics, the kind of partners you like to climb with, that sort of thing. Alpinism, it's just more than rock climbing or anything else. To me, it doesn't seem to be as much about the individual routes, because it's such this logistic thing. It's so important about the partners. And then the thing I always am interested in as a rock climber, the climbing route is this specific, this exact line, these exact holds. A lot of times, you're following this crack, and the crux is going to be this underclink to a, to a finger lock, and then you got to move left. And the alpinism, the route is just it goes up this face, and this year it goes this direction, and this year it goes this direction. So the routes even become quite a bit more amorphous than a rock climb.
Oh, totally.
Did. So so tell me about the expedition styles and places that you like to go.
Well, all right, we can break it down a little bit.
Okay.
In terms of expedition styles, the kind of modern alpinism expedition of a small team going to remote places to try new things.
Okay.
It's what a lot of our community pursues, and it's really sweet. It's so fun. To be able to take a group of people who you adore and go to an amazing place and try to do something that hasn't been done. It's just, I don't know. It's super badass. Mm-hmm. It's really, it's emotionally, challenging and really fun. It's really, it's physically, totally. I guess it's physically really challenging, and and you get to spend time in these gorgeous places, and I love that. I just can't get enough of it. And I've been really fortunate over the years to have a bunch of partners who I get along with really well, and we hold similar values for what we want to climb, how we want to climb it, what we want our safety margins to look like. And I think that those three things are probably the most important. If they're, for me, I don't have any interest in dying in the mountains. I want to live to be an old guy.
Right.
I've been climbing with Steve Swenson quite a bit recently, and I just try to, capture as much of that beta as I can, right?
Tell me a little bit about Steve, or tell us a little bit about Steve.
Swenson is, I think Swenson is 63 now, still crushing. And we're going to the Karakoram together this summer, and he's lived this incredible balanced life where he's been he's been a good partner to his wife. He's been a good dad. He's been a successful businessman. Well, I guess he's a retired engineer, so he's had a really successful career, and he's had this incredible climbing career. And he's been on, I'm actually not sure how many Pakistani or Karakoram trips he's been on. A lot, like upwards of 20, and he's climbed all sorts of radical shit. And he's just really done a great job of balancing, his different life goals and his need to stay safe.
Right.
And I just, he's somebody who I really look up to.
Sure.
And who I would love to emulate, at least in, some ways. And so I think for me, I'm looking for a partner who's somebody who I trust, who I know that we can make good decisions, both that will allow us to be successful and will allow us to come home safe.
Right.
There's kind of a fine line there that you oftentimes have to tread.
Well, I was going to ask you that, and I don't know if you're able to get into any super specifics, but obviously, unless you're like Johnny Waterman or whatever, like you don't obviously go out into the mountains to not come back. There's been times where like that's a famous example of someone who left to not come back, and he didn't come back. But generally, anybody's going to say that. Like, I don't want to die in the mountains. So, is there a way to be more specific about your decision making in terms of someone else who's thinking about, I also had this really close call, and I wonder why I made that decision, or, what does it look like to you to say, I manage my risk, I don't take undue risk? Because obviously, as soon as you leave the United States or you walk out your front door, if we want to get down that low, but really, as soon as you leave base camp and you're on the mountain, you're walking into that world.
Yeah, absolutely the case. The risks in the mountains are super real and, occasionally unavoidable. I'm trying to think about the best way to answer that question. I think sometimes you need to be willing to say no. I think sometimes being really thoughtful and pragmatic about your decision making, and then just gathering as much information as you can, and then utilizing that information to make the best decision you can. And those are really the things that I focus on.
Well, and then the relationship with your partner has to come in paramount in there. I've talked about this with, I think on the show perhaps, but I climb with partners, and the good partners push you. They sort of bring out your best, and and sometimes that is, they become a little bit of a bulwark against you giving up.
right? Because, a really good partner of mine, Rob Van Arnhem from Crested Butte for years, my greatest and best partner in terms of rock climbing. We've had these moments where both of us secretly wanted to go down, but we didn't. Nobody was going to say it. Nobody was going to pull the parachute, kind of thing. And then finally when someone said, man, I don't know about this, the other person was like, yeah, me neither, let's get out of here. But I've also climbed with people where I've been the guy that when the person wanted to give up, I was pissed. Or I've been the guy that said, no, we're done. And the person I was climbing with is like, well, what are you talking about? So the dynamic with making those decisions has to be it's not as simple as just like everybody has veto power. Although I guess in the end they do.
For sure.
Personally.
I think that, I don't know, am I using pragmatism correctly when I say like just being really pragmatic about that you have the feeling of fear, and it's oftentimes, it creates fear when you're on the sides of these mountains. Lots of times, on any climb, you'll have a moment where you're like, oh fuck, where am I? This is not a good idea.
Right.
I am tied to the side of a large mountain, and working through that to say, okay, where am I on the mountain? What are conditions doing? What's the weather doing? What's our health like? What's our, what's our level of fatigue like? And are we in a position where we are actually unsafe and we should go down? Or are we in a position where we are safe and we should continue up? Or are we in a position where we're kind of unsafe, but actually we kind of need to go up because going down is worse?
Well, yeah, that's the Kelly Cordes,
yeah.
Can't remember what he called it, but the idea that you just get as high as you can before you kind of realize what's going on.
Totally.
Before you wake up.
Totally, dude. And I think, it's really interesting. I think that something that was, when I was younger, was really helpful for me was the idea of, you can view safety as the ground. Like the ground is safety, home is safety. Sitting in Carbondale drinking a cappuccino is pretty damn safe.
Yeah, for sure.
It's also pretty great.
Yeah.
But if you can define safety as the next belay, or as that place where you can bivvy, and it's safe, it's if you are in a dangerous position, kind of figuring out where that next island of safety is and moving to that is something that I think about a lot. It's and it can come down to just being on a pitch and being like, man, I'm run out, I'm scared. What do I need to do? Do I need to go down? And it's like, actually, you can just go up, and once you reach that next belay, you're probably just as safe as you were at the last belay.
Right.
And then just really, kind of developing those, those kind of mental parameters for how to deal with those feelings and understand what a bad feeling of fear is, and then try to define where it's coming from and see if it's actually something that you need to act upon.
Okay.
I don't know.
That's
a bunch of rambling about trying to be safe in the mountains.
Yeah, but what you're trying to do is explain a thought process that's not, it's not as conscious as, these ticking of boxes that, the way you have to explain it is that way, but we know that it's all these constant run around of thoughts that are,
Well, and then also you have to pay attention to gut feeling, right? We've all heard stories about, that team that was up there and nothing was apparently wrong, but but somebody really felt like they needed to go down. They went down and an avalanche washed the face or whatever.
Right.
And so I do think that's really important. And I think that one of the most important things as well is route choice. And I think that I don't know. It's in speaking kind of a public forum like this. I think that this obviously applies to first ascents or whatever. But I think given how much these mountain environments are changing, as with climate change and all that, I think that each route that we get on needs to be assessed for safety as in terms of does this have objective hazard? Is this a good idea? And a lot of what I'm pursuing in climbing, whether it's an established route or something new, is a very specific type of line, and it's one that is a convexity. So it sticks out. So if things shed off of it, they're going to shed away from it versus into it. Mm-hmm. You know, like versus a concavity, like a couloir. It's steep, and it's relatively free of objective hazard.
Right.
And if I can, and I think it's sweet because that also, you know, what you're talking about is like big alpine buttresses and these big ridges, and I think that those features are also beautiful. They're super aesthetically pleasing, and they oftentimes offer really bitchin' climbing, right? I mean, you think about like the big buttresses of the world.
Well, it occurs to me that in a lot of ways, sort of the modern approach to these big mountains versus 30 years ago or 40 years ago, or you know, that's flipped to where you guys have the skills, the gear, the vision to climb these things that were literally avoided, because that, I mean, what you're saying, the convexity or the concavity, which one it goes?
Concavity's in, so concave.
Concavity is what they looked for in the years past, in the 50s and 60s, was let's go up the gut of this thing where there's this, you know, mellow snow climb, but of course the 50 or 55 degree snow climb is the thing that's going to rip.
Dude, totally. I mean, there are all these first descent routes of these big peaks. A lot of them are death routes, right?
Yeah. And they just snuck in, or they didn't.
And it's, and I mean, it's, yeah. And I don't know. Personally, it's one reason why I'm really thankful that I'm alive and climbing now.
Right.
Because I think we do have the ability to stay on these features that offer arguably better climbing and are safer.
Yeah, objectively safer.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, that's just what we want, right?
Yeah.
Hard climbing, compelling climbing, that, you know, where the responsibility of your safety is up to you not falling instead of worrying about something falling on you.
Something coming down one day.
Yeah. So that's really what gets me fired up.
Right.
But I don't know. I think that the last note is probably that partnership is, you know, you hear a lot of discussion about the brotherhood of the rope and that kind of stuff, and it oftentimes sounds so cliche, but it's so damn true.
Right.
You know, the relationships that we form in these mountains are just incredible. They're so intimate, and it's really fascinating to me that, you know, there are like my partner Shannon, my romantic life partner. You know, she knows me really well, and she probably knows me better than anybody. But there are parts of me that only my climbing partners know about.
Right.
You know, she's not a climber. She doesn't really have any interest in suffering on big mountains. She's, you know, a smart, reasonable woman. And and I really appreciate it. And but you know, it means that there are some parts of me that she may never know, and that's, which is fine. You know, I think she's probably even more okay with that than I am. But you know, there are these friends that I have who know those parts of me really well, because we've spent all this time hanging off these big mountain faces together, and it allows for the formation of these relationships that are just really tight bonds. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting because alpinism, again, there's like this I guess conceit, or this idea that, you know, it's these manly men. At least it used to be mostly manly men. It's getting, you know, we talk about on the show all the time. It's evening out, but alpinism still is a lot of dudes up there in the mountains together.
There are definitely some women who are crushing, and it's super cool.
But there is this. It's ironic because in a lot of ways it is this like incredibly intimate relationship that can happen. I mean, you know, like you just said, I don't know anybody else that has seen me, you know, that like strung out, that scared, you know, like crumbling, and in any other part of my life, the way like some of these partners that I've had climbing, and I'm not an alpinist, but you know, I've had plenty of like Black Canyon climbing experiences that, you know, ended in me sort of, you know, breaking apart at least a little bit. And you know, I've joked about crying on lead, but that was both those times where I was soloing, so There was no one to witness it. There was no one to witness the single tear come out of my eye and drip down and fall 2,000 feet to the valley floor. This one funny. Tear. No, actually, it was in the Fisher Towers. Anyway, that's a whole other story. But yeah, it's fun. It's cool you say the intimacy because it's glossed over in a lot of ways. And you know, you going back to your films, you guys have made fun of it in a couple little vignette films, your Shiver Bivvy and some of those other ones. But for you to sit here and talk about that is a little bit of a modern idea as well, because you know, if you read the great pieces from the, you know, Annapurna and, you know, the conquistadors of the absurd and stuff like that, you know, these men were not talking about like intimacy on these mountains the way I think it gets talked about nowadays, or even projected in some of the films and stuff that we see.
Totally. Yeah, man. I mean, and it was certainly there. Right.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, these guys, you know, we talked to the, you know, the veterans these days, and one of the primary things they talk about is the brother the rope.
Well, you know, I said that, but then I think back to Mallory, and if you read, you know, that guy was a pretty sensitive dude.
For sure, yeah.
His writing.
I think Mallory was a pretty unique individual in that whole scene.
Right.
Yeah, he was. You know, there was the very like the British mindset of being the like untrained gentleman adventurer, and he was a little bit of an enigma in that realm.
Yeah, well, and
as was Hillary.
Yeah, those guys were shattered though too by the war already. You know, that's a big part of that whole generation. The earliest Everest guys, that was really post World War I, and a lot of them were veterans, so they had already been like laid as bare as they could possibly be.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, Jesus, yeah.
And Hillary too. You were saying he was a different mold.
He was an enigma because he was I don't know. Hillary's somebody who I really think is he's sweet. He because since he was from the outer edge of the, you know, British Empire, he it was acceptable that he would train.
Okay.
So like none of these guys who were based in the UK would train at all, because they had to be gentlemen.
Right, it seemed like beneath them.
Yeah, it was the Swiss guy.
To get a little sweat on their brows.
Totally. They would actively talk shit about the Swiss guides who would train and, like, you know, prepare for these trips, and these guys would just be sitting around drinking tea, talking about how great it was going to be. But since Hillary was, you know, from the nether regions of New Zealand, it was okay that he ran up a couple hills, and then, you know, he's the one who sent, right?
Right, yeah.
I love that.
So have you been to altitude much? What's your experience with altitude?
I climbed 7,000 meters for my first time in 2015. And it was great.
Yeah?
Yeah. I don't know, getting up in rarefied air is super badass. I guess personally my progression I've done some climbing in Asia over the years, but I've done a lot of climbing in Alaska and down in South America. That's where a lot of my kind of foundation is, and it's been more recently that I've started going to like Pakistan and trying some of the higher peaks over there.
Right.
And I'm pretty enthralled by it.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, it's really, when you're up high, it's where you really get to test your training. It's just gorgeous. You know, it feels, you get way up there and it feels like being on the moon.
So do you have aspirations to go to 8,000?
Not really. Not for like the usual reasons anyway.
Right.
Like I think that it would be really cool to climb an 8,000 meter peak.
Right.
But not because it's an 8,000 meter peak.
Sure.
Rather because it's something that I would love to see how my body does up there.
Right.
And see how my training can hold up for that kind of objective. You know, the things that fascinate me most in the mountains have to do with getting at places where people don't normally go.
Okay.
And, you know, going somewhere where I'm not going to see anybody else for a month, or just, you know, I'll just see my partners. And we can be trying things that haven't been done and are kind of off the beaten path.
Sure.
And there's that sense of discovery. That's something that I really like.
Right. Yeah. The 8,000 meter peaks they come with the hullabaloo.
Dude, there's a lot of baggage.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
those days of by yourself are 40 years gone or whatever.
Oh, yeah,
on most of these big peaks.
Yeah. And maybe, I mean, who knows? Like, some of the 8,000 meter peaks have really incredible unclimbed objectives.
Sure.
And they may be on faces that are a little bit off the beaten path. And that would be super cool. I'd be super interested in that. But going and like climbing Everest via the South Col is not something I'm particularly interested in.
There's a podcast, Graham just made this really grimaced face when he said that. You can't see it on the podcast, but
I mean, and I think it's sweet. If that's something that really inspires you, awesome. But like, I just don't,
Yeah, I mean, that's a typical mold of the alpinist on the show. Like, that's not the scene anymore. If there was some side of Everest where you could go and climb something still, but
totally.
It's almost, with those guys that, with the whole Sherpa fight and all that a few years ago, sort of showed that it's almost close to doing anything out of the ordinary anymore.
Totally.
Because you're in the way, the commercial thing has to march on, and it's just not there for you anymore.
And there's, and there's a lot of garbage, and there are a lot of people, and there's Wi-Fi.
Right.
That's not why I go to the mountains.
Yeah.
I go to the mountains to have like a very, intimate experience in the mountains, in a natural space, leave it as as clean as I found it, and try to really push myself on something that I find compelling and challenging. And I don't really see that experience coming to fruition on Everest.
So looking at the arc of your career so far, if you want to call it a career, a climbing career, you talk about Steve Swenson as this mentor, whether he's meant to be or not. You're gleaning all this knowledge from him, and someone you said you looked up to. And looking at your career, I mean, you're getting to this point now where you're not bumbling around. You talk about these first expeditions. We didn't get any specifics, but you said the first ones didn't go the way we thought they were going to go, and you started to figure it out. It seems like you're at a point now where, or maybe I'm asking if you feel like you're at a point, and don't get too cocky and ruin it, but are you at a point now where you feel like you have something to offer maybe some partners who aren't as experienced as you are? Could you possibly think of yourself as this mentor role yet, in terms of bringing something to the game that is based in experience and based in getting things done and having a decent track record?
Well, let's be clear. I still bumble fairly regularly.
Right.
But
well, it'd be boring if you were just like knocking them out of the park every damn time. Oh, dude, maybe not. It'd be awesome.
I don't know. That'd probably be sweet. But it's interesting. I think that this kind of comes back to content creation, sharing, inspiration. I really am psyched to share inspiration with others, and sometimes that comes in the form of going out with friends who maybe have a little bit less experience or experience in different realms. I was actually just on a trip in Alaska with Forrest Woodward, who's really sinking his teeth into climbing in a big way. He's a super talented photographer. Right. He's actually here at the festival as well. And then our pal Brody Levin, who's a super bitchin' skier. And it was the three of us in the mountains, not with a super clear objective besides having fun, challenging each other, and learning from each other. And it was really cool to be able to go out with those guys and, the little stuff that these days feels like no big deal, like how to build a cook tent in Alaska. Mm-hmm. Kind of like lay out how I think about it and kind of give them a little bit of instruction, and talking to Brody about, Jesus, dude, how do I ski this kind of stuff? This is terrifying. And talking to Forrest about how to be a better, creative person, mm-hmm. and how to take better photos and take better videos and understand light more effectively and things like that. And so I think that learning and teaching are super important. And then I think there's also this really cool opportunity with climbing, and the little like soapbox that we get as athletes to try to inspire others to do whatever it is that they want to do. I've been like trying to get into, well, not trying, I guess I've been getting into classrooms around where I live, just talking to students about what I do, how passion is driven what I do, and how I've been pretty systematic about
trying to achieve what I want, and then sharing with them, listen, like this for me, this is climbing, but for you, this can be whatever it is that gets you fired up.
Right.
That can be dance, mathematics, whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's been something that I've been really, really fired up about. Just trying to, have that influence on both people who are close to me, who I can like teach directly about mountains, and then people who may not give a shit about mountains at all, but they give a shit about something else. And I think that, I think that in teaching if you're thinking about teaching somebody else, it means you have to really master your personal methodology, and I think that's something that's been really beneficial for me. Mm-hmm. Is instead of just kind of going through my personal motions, I have to describe them to somebody, and that means that I actually have to have them zeroed in.
Yeah,
which is sweet.
Yeah, it's a good. I mean, there's no doubt that teaching makes you, evaluate what you're up to, and sometimes you find out a ton about, the bullshit that you've been dealing with, or you've been telling people that's not like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah. I've been saying that for 20 years and it's actually totally bullshit.
Yeah. when your buddy asks you, so why do you do it that way? And you're like, I don't know.
Maybe I shouldn't be.
Let me think about that.
Exactly.
Let's reevaluate.
So tell me your film here again, because it's gonna. Is this a premiere for it?
World premiere, yep. Carbondale, Colorado.
What's it called again?
Above the Fray.
Okay, and it's about Beth, and so we'll be able to see that coming out here in festivals and stuff this year. And
for sure, it'll be playing at festivals, and then it's gonna release online in a few weeks.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thanks a lot for sitting down. I'm glad we finally met. It was another one of these things where maybe we have crossed paths, but we're a different generation, and I'm a rock climber, and
I try to rock climb occasionally. I actually live in Bend,
yeah,
and so I go to Smith Rock and I get my ass kicked on a regular basis.
Yeah. So if we crossed paths, it was on the way to the toilet in Indian Creek or something.
Totally.
So, but great sitting down with you, and I appreciate your enthusiasm, and as much as you kept saying the word rambling or whatever, the thoughts that you've sort of elucidated for us are pretty important in terms of getting out into the mountains and being careful and understanding your motivation. So appreciate you sitting down.
Oh, dude, I appreciate it too. It's really great to come and chat with you, man. It's I've been listening to your show for a long time, and it's delightful to be able to chat with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Graham.
Hell yeah.
All right, folks, thanks for listening. Thanks to Graham for sitting down. Appreciate the time. Some sage advice from a youngish alpinist, though he has learned from the best. Remember that you can help out the Enormocast if you love it, or if you like it, or even if you hate listen, or if you're just kind of ambivalent but it passes the time. Whatever. If you're listening, please consider helping out. Head over to enormocast.com, click on the Help Out tab. If you haven't written a review, please do. It somehow helps me, even if they're shitty reviews, apparently. Just reviewing it makes it, I don't know, something happens. It's supposed to be important. And or you can like the Facebook page, do a few other things. Of course, please tell your friends. And of course, if you want to help out financially, you can donate or you can support our sponsors. You can buy sweet gear from a lot of companies. I get it. But if you support our sponsors, you are supporting the show. And please feel free to let them know that you're glad that they're on board with the Enormocast too. Okay, folks, it's the dog days of summer. We're winding into fall. Of course, the great time here in North America for climbing almost everywhere is the fall. But in the meantime, stay frosty out there. Keep your eyes on the safety prize. Use your signals. Make sure and communicate on the ground and on the climb. And of course, check your knot.
If I were to ask you what your philosophy of life or your creed, what would that be?
Have a good time all the time. That's my philosophy, Marty.